Yeah, man. Look, I love my mom to death. I love her to death. I really do. I do indeed.
And there's-
But when she's over there making a bowl of cereal and banging coffee cups around the place, I swear to God. I swear to Christ. I couldn't talk at all. Alright. PAX has been lax, in my opinion. I don't
Oh
know.
wait, we're recording now.
Yes, we are recording now. We are
Okay.
recording big signals. We are back. We already did
All right.
5 minutes, and now we're doing this again.
Okay,
I can
just
actually
make sure you
feel like
cut that.
I can kind of feel like myself whenever I'm on my own, even though there is no barrier between the two of us other than a wall. But at least I'm not hearing everything going off in the microwave and everything. So
Yep, yep.
yeah, I don't know what it is. I don't know whether enough there was just not enough hype. Was Gamescom was recently as well too. You know, when do you know? I mean, where do we see these things filter out? It's usually into trailers and into YouTube and IGN. You know, what I mean, Polygon's usually putting out decent articles and stuff like that about good things that they see. I just haven't seen them yet. Maybe it's just too early. Maybe I'm too late. Maybe I've already missed them. I don't know.
Personally, because I don't really look at social media or honestly any site aggregators, I just rely on Discord. When something it's up to my communities to bubble up something to me. So in that terms, I didn't see anything
This is
either
true.
about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm an ignorant Reddit head. And I'm not on Twitter for sure, so you know what I mean. I get it. I'm
Yep.
probably saying, yeah, it's one of those things of old people just being like, I didn't see it. It's like you're not looking anywhere where anything is these days, right? So
I did not find out about the Queen being dead until Discord people notified me, which was within 10 minutes, but still,
that's
it was
funny. Where on the Discord? Like, is it just your guys'
somebody
personals or
somebody from the UK just DM'd me. So yeah, it was just a personal DM.
you just had to scream at you,
Yeah.
Calvin? The Queen is dead. What do I do? I don't know. The country's falling apart right now. This was our last identity. Yeah, best of luck. Good luck in all of your changeover of your money and mailboxes and everything else that'll happen out of all of that. But yeah, Jesus Christ, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it is strange because like I feel like, talking to publishers about board games and stuff like that, like they don't really even care about the board game itself. They care about your TikTok views and they care about your social media impressions, how many people are following you, and like that's
Wow.
that's how we were selling the game. You know, like they want to sell the game. It's like if you can't get a presence, then what's the point? You know what I mean? If you have no traction. Now maybe this is for like the bigger chain stores, Walmart, Target, Barnes and Noble. But at the same time, it is definitely like an interesting case of, you know, just what's selling your game, right? Like these days, we know like it's not enough to just make a good game these days. Technically, maybe,
Right.
right? Like you kind of do have to like put it out to somewhere or to someone or to and get some traction there because otherwise like you'll just make a very quiet splash with your good game and maybe it'll slow roll if it is a good game and people talk about it word of mouth K factor and it'll start kind of pushing from there and stuff like that but yeah like I mean I don't
How,
know.
how, how much do you think Discord factors into the success?
We see this is the funny thing because I think that Discord is adopted massively, right? And I would have thought that Discord at the time, what they should have done was built a schools feature almost instantaneously and started marketing to schools when the pandemic started hitting, right? The rise of Zoom is a marketing play, right? They had a subpar product that they had ripped together
Yeah.
as quickly as possible, but they became a buzzword amongst
Yes.
older execs that had literally never used a video software in their entire life, have maybe used Skype to call their kids and see their grandkids, maybe, who knows? But they knew that they couldn't use that, and they couldn't figure out any other solution, right? So it was like, this is here, it was free, the 45-minute, position was great, and that got people in. Discord to myself is like, the kids use it, right? Kiddos are all using it. It's already attached to server based stuff, so we can just take your profile, take your account, and just move it into this thing. Uh, we have breakout rooms. We have video across all of them. Everybody can video at the same time. You can pay for all those premium features and everything like that too. And I just always thought that that was like a much. If you're gonna go with what people are using these days, that's the platform to go to. Problem that I have with Discord though is the UX is awful, right? Like I'm at the part of maybe like 20, 30 servers or whatever, right? That list
Oh
of
my
bubbles
god,
down the
no.
left hand
I have
side.
100. I have 100. I'm at max. 100 or 200 is a nightmare.
I don't know how you manage that. That's why I'm on Do Not Disturb all the time because I just get red badged and notified about every single post in the most random channels, and I don't need to know about everything. So I just ignore it all, right? And then
Yeah.
trying to find like where my friends are. Hey, we have 4 or 5 servers that we all bounce between. It's like, where are they right now? It's like that seems to be like a weird, like hard thing to do and stuff too. But I think if you
You,
actually have like a core group, it's not a bad place. Like if you pay attention to individual servers, like not a bad thing. But what is it about that top level UX that really drives me? I ignore it.
you know what's funny about that is that Discord is, especially for game devs, it's a great communication tool to say, hey, we got update 1.2 out and stuff. And then you have to add everyone. And then adding, when you
That's
add
fun.
everyone and notify everyone is like, you might see, it depends on the server, I guess. But like a lot of people will be like, oh no, you just added me. I'm out of here. Like, screw you. Like, they're just like
A
really
hundred
pissed
percent.
that you use the one main communication tool that has.
Oh, nah, I'll find it on my own. Absolutely not. Not a chance in the world. No, no, no. No, I feel that absolutely. Like, that's the thing is, these things are important. When we were, uh, when we were doing Play NYC, and even now, I guess too, with like PAX and stuff like that, with the board game, we would try to jump into and Swing Striker I guess too, like we would try to jump into communities and engage for like a couple of days and then post our own stuff, and it was like this case of self promotion. Like
Yeah.
you're not really engaging with the community, you're just kind of like, hey, I found this gaming Discord. Hey, I'm here, what's up, hi, how's it going, oh, why don't you check this out? Right, like, and that wasn't, that wasn't good either in the same vein, because it was like people just don't, especially when they're in their own bubble of their own community, they very some people can be very nasty and just be
Absolutely.
like, why are you posting here? Why are you bringing anything to this sanctity of a home? And it's like, I don't know, man. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to sell a bloody board game. Like, you know what I mean? Just help me out. Click the link, please. Just check it out. But, people can be very spiteful in those cases, and it kind of sucks in that way. But I don't know. You mean, because this is the thing. I don't do the TikToks. But casual visibility into your product is like unbelievably important. So keeping that up and keeping the snippets going somewhere, I think is still big. Now it's like when that brings back into this whole you know PAX, Gamescom, all of these things. I can't. Maybe again like, are we thinking too siloed? Is that why I'm not seeing it? Do all of these games have their own Discord and their own community, and they're only posting to their own thing, and then, or maybe it's just they're all on Twitter and I'm just not looking at these
Y-
things. You know what I
You know,
mean?
in general, I have a really strong question about that. Is how valuable is it to go to these as an indie dev to have a booth?
I think it's actually weirdly important now that I've done a few
Okay.
of them. If you have zero name, it's a great place to just get 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 visibility on your thing. There's people who are walking around all the time that are, press, or at least have the press badges. There's loads of people who are just, with honestly, crappy YouTube channels. Just like, hey, I got 25. We're us. They've got more subscribers than us, right? And
Yeah.
and maybe they get 200 views a video or whatever, right? But the fact of the matter is that those videos go up online, and they go up online with your game's name, and they're going up on multiple sources, and that was the thing that we valued more than anything else. The connections that we've made actually after the fact have been huge, and that's where the publishers are going. You know what I mean? The publishers are paying, big bucks for individuals to fly out to these conferences just to go look, go talk. You know what I mean? Deal
Yeah.
with things. So interestingly enough, there, yeah, I mean, there's no hardcore thing here, right? But we joined this publishing round called GTR, right? Game Top Round. It's a European fund that you can apply for. They take in all of these applications at certain points within the year. They will filter all of those out. The ones that they like, they will the ones that they will like, they bring about 50, right? And they will help fly you to a conference by themselves. Your games then are all shown to bigger publishers, Devolver, blah blah blah, like all, and then those guys then get basically like first picks of who wants to make a deal, and if your game is good enough and they think that they can sell it, and there's obviously they have their own internal process. There's probably more back and forth and everything else. They'll send your game to these people, and you can theoretically, hopefully, get onto that circuit at that level. They'll also do some things, funding rounds. They'll pay for your game, but you have to give them 10% of your total revenue or whatever, right? So there's definitely some gotchas and some caveats, but what do you care when it's one game and it's the start of your company or the start
Yeah,
of your
exactly.
thing, right? Like it's like I just want it out, and I want it out and doing well or whatever that seems to mean. But especially with those badges, with the big indie title badges, they were pretty cool, but long and short, we applied. We didn't make it through the filter round, but they did like the game. They just didn't think that it was like there yet, right? And what we actually did was they have a testbed platform, which is their own game section, right? They're kind of their own game publisher for tertiary markets. A lot of players will come in from different countries to come play those games for
Oh,
free, and it's an amazing way to get eyeballs on critical reviews. You have your own page, you're featured on their storefront, you have an entire comment section that everybody can just whip in feedback, and people are encouraged. The whole point is it is a feedback platform, so everybody's encouraged to go and do that. And the nice thing is that there's only like 5 games live at any one time, so it's not like you're only live for about a week to 10 days. So it's not like you can be there infinitely. It's not like you can be you'll be there and then there's 100 other things and everybody's just playing the good stuff. Is this constant cycle of players jumping in and out of your game.
that
And
sounds interesting.
and it also then helps because it's a closed platform, but there's still a decent amount of players there. You can we ended up they will link you up with the YouTubers and Twitch streamers that they have under their own branch. So we ended up doing 3 different live streams with individuals on different channels. We ended up having like a couple of different video reviews. Every one of the Twitch streamers like threw up a video of them playing the game and blah blah blah. And again, it's just nice because like when somebody searches, they can find your game. Uh, but they were there, and we hadn't. That was a year ago, and funnily enough, we found one of the people, and they saw the game at the conference, and they went and said, "Oh, like
Yeah.
I remember that. Like, yeah, hell yeah." So they came over, started talking to our CEO. They exchanged information. The next day, they requested 5 new keys. So it's like, oh, okay. Well, what's that all about? I mean, if they just want to jump in and just see what the state of the game is now and just kind of go from there. But I think that building those connections, just having a very casual glance of some of these things, like these are the weird meeting spots for the business to happen. And the more that we have done it, the more that Giant Fox as a brand, I think, has at least been shown. You know what I mean? It's at least out
Yeah.
there, and I think that that's more important than anything else. Visibility is big. Now, do you always
Yeah.
remember everything about these things? No, of course not. Is this great for the wider market or anything like that? Probably not. But will it help you maybe get a deal? Like, yeah, you know what I mean, maybe. If your game is good enough and it's shown well and it's it's of quality, right? You know what I mean? If it's there, then maybe you have a shot. But that's what that more organic traffic is of like, can you sell the game off of the visual of the game? Probably.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting because I've definitely been to these events and I'll look at some of these games. Some of them might look like really amateur. I'm like, oh no, I don't. I feel like these guys they kind of flew out here and maybe paid for the booth and then like they're not going to get any ROI from it. But when I think about the games that really take off, especially in the roguelike sphere, I mean, that's the hot things. Like just make a game with not too much content, but make it all randomized, and now you have like a hit game for cheap.
Yeah.
End quote. Like, those games typically show up on a lot of popular YouTube channels like Northern Lion and
Mm-hmm.
other well-known ones. And I have always wondered, is like how are these guys getting the idea to play a game? And I do feel like I'm assuming they get a lot of it from the community. The community is like, "Hey, you should play this game," and then they can kind of get a leg up on the competition on YouTube. But what you just said also makes a lot of sense. It's like they probably go to PAX and all these other. Oh, they don't. They
I
don't.
don't.
Okay.
I don't think so. You know what I mean?
Okay.
These,
Yeah.
no, like, I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm cynical, so I just go and say people are just getting paid to play. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yeah, the community just bubbles up better games for people to check out, and those people are the ones who are actually checking and seeing the news and seeing what's
Yeah.
live and blah, 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 what's coming down the pipe, and then they're like, please notice me, please look at this great game. You can check this out. Oh my god! Right? And
You're
like,
probably right. It's probably there's probably the hardcore gamers that go out to PAX and then they maybe share it and say, "Hey, you should check this out." But yeah, you're right. Maybe it's not the YouTubers that themselves
there used to be
that
a
go out.
time. There used to be a time where you could just share keys with like bigger streamers and everything like that. Years and years ago, and you'd have a chance that somebody would actually play your game. But nowadays, it's like if you want to go to anybody with substance or with actual like views and stuff like that, and say, "Hey, can you play my
Yeah.
game for a little bit? Check this out. Do you like this?" They'll still ask for a kickback. You know what I mean? They're still asking
Yeah.
for like a
Yeah.
couple of grand for you to play the game for like an hour, and it's like, maybe
That's
that's.
right.
And then you don't know what kind of thing you're gonna get. There was this one time where we actually just somebody was playing the game, and there was a round robin, right? So they had 8 games that they were going to play, and they had a gong. And
Oh.
when the player base voted, basically to kill, Roman Empire style,
Yeah.
they closed the game instantly and went to the next game.
Damn.
I think one of the games only, or our game, like got like maybe 5 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, right?
Wow.
And that was a disaster because it was like you would, I mean, this would you would have liked this, but you didn't even give it the chance, and now it just looks like a crappy game, and it's not even a footnote in the thing. You know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
everybody's idea of your game is now negative, and it's like, oh, well, I just paid three
Yeah.
grand for that. You know what I mean? Are you kidding me?
Right.
Like
Right.
that's ridiculous. But I mean, it is what it is. I don't know.
There is a variation of that, a very positive variation, which is when you do game jams. After a game jam's over, like let's say Ludum Dare,
Mm-hmm.
there's gonna be like a dozen or two streamers that are like, "Hey, just send me your Ludum Dare game," and they'll play it for like probably 30 minutes usually, because they have such few viewers. Like they'll have like 20 to 80 viewers max, and then they'll give you a lot of feedback and a lot of playtime. Not that this matters for marketing reasons, but if you are a very very amateur game dev, I recommend doing that because it'll be pretty rewarding.
I think any visibility is good visibility for the most part. And
Yeah.
if somebody does have even 20 consistent concurrent viewers and they're talking and blah, 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 like that's 20 eyeballs of engaged, users that are paying attention.
Yeah.
And if those players then go off and buy your game and then like it, they're more likely to recommend it to other people then too. So those 20 might turn into 30. Those 30 might turn into 40. I mean, that's what K factor is. That's what the social virality is. And you mean definitely playing into that and making sure that, there's a tiers system to all of this, right? Your early adopters, players who get in first, they see your game first. They love that because they're engaged with your project. They've seen it throughout the life cycle of the whole thing. Um, and then once the game is finally released, they jump in hardcore. They play a lot, but then they're the ones who are recommending to other people. They're pushing it to other social feeds, like whenever you have new trailers, blah blah blah. So it's like there's good and pros and cons of all of these things, but in general, I think that the biggest thing is like just do it when you're ready. Just like you were saying, there's
Right.
like there's people who go to conferences and they're like they're the game, they're just not ready, right? Like the game's not ready, the game's too small, it's not that kind of thing, you know what I mean? And that's like a market fit. Like that's we'll see. I definitely saw that at play NYC. There was a couple of things that were blah, but there's also loads of student projects that get sponsored to go to
Right.
these conferences. There's whole booth areas that are just independent developer games, and maybe somebody sees a nugget of something, or you talk to somebody, you build a connection, that all of a sudden then builds into more contracting gigs. Like it's like, hey, you got work, like I need work, and you can find your game dev community, which I think is awesome by itself too, but yeah, I've definitely. It is what it is. I think anybody can make success. It just takes a minute. I don't know. You know, everybody's got a different path within this section. Is really what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know. Gaming news is lacking. So whatever. Who cares? The Velma news from the multiverses was the most hilarious thing of all time, and I am. It is an amazing change, great change. I rip the times that Velma calls the police on people. Perfect. That's awesome. Um, but we wanted to try and talk about a couple of different topics today, but one of them was kind of like level design, but the other one, the last one, was game data and what your data looks like in your game right now. And I'd like to kind of just jump into that one, if possible.
No, sounds good.
In a weird way, this is a problem that I've been dealing with now for like uh, I don't know, whatever, last 2 years or whatever. But game data is important but different between different groups. And what I mean by that is that let's say that you have a very straightforward, we go from point A to point B type of title. Something like The Last of Us, something like, uh, you know, give me another linear narrative game, like God of War or something like that, right?
Right.
I would call those things, there's not heavy game data, right? It's feature heavy. The features have data, on them. You're building some tuning levers there or whatever, right? But like for the most part, you're actually not building real big systematic systems. A lot
Right.
of it is glue code, or well, I'm not going to say glue code because that's something completely different, but like glued together, sequences that are kind of just, it does this, and then it does this, and then it does this, and if you wanted to do something else, we got to go back and like figure something out and build that again, right?
Yeah.
It leads into our last topic of just quality versus speed and tooling and everything else around it. But when you're building modern mobile games that are supposed to scale, live ops, all of these things, we want really heavily data driven games, right? Everything is a system, rewards is a system, data by itself is a system, right? So now we have to have APIs talking to either a database, or we need to have scriptable objects being pulled down from the server. We need to have data versioning. Oh wait, it's 1.6.3. Hey, there's a bug in this. I want to add something else. Now I got to do a new data version. And then you still have to do that in modern games too, but not at the same clip, right? Like in those cases, you're usually pushing a new content client version versus like in my case, like I want to be just pushing data and assets like a lot of the time.
Yeah. Now, one way I visualize this is that linear games are, there's a bunch of arcs that string together, whereas a systematic game has loops that go back into each other. A question I do have is, can you have a linear game that uh, is heavily data driven?
I wouldn't say no. You know what I mean? I think that that's what like, well maybe I don't know. Is that what No Man's Sky really is? You know, is like, hey, I've got a linear track of story, but there's all of these external
I
loops
see.
that
Okay,
are
okay,
built off of the thing, and that's where I have my kind of systems. You know,
right.
but it is a different way to think as a designer, because you know one of the things is like game design has now fragmented so massively that there is a difference between AAA designers, indie designers, and free to play mobile game designers in terms of how we think about systems, how we think about, you know, methodologies, how we think about other things. As a free to play designer, or at least when I'm in that sphere, I definitely over index into let's build this thing as a system. And it's gotten me in trouble before where I was building a level for a game and the I we'd kind of like it was the first level that I was making for them, and I just thrown out a bunch of random ideas, and one of them was this like twin tower or two towers, you know, the Lord of the Rings
Lord of the
game,
Rings, yeah.
right? And you're on top of the you're on top of the castle. Ladders are coming up, and enemies are coming up the ladder, and you got to
Nice.
go and smack the things, right? So in my approach, I was like, okay, well, I want to push and pull the player into different things. I want to move them from side to side. I want to have some imposed constraints on you know, how many enemies are going to be alive or available for the player to kill at any one time. And my solution to that was to always be checking to see how many ladders were alive, right? Start with one, and then over time, as the player knocks more ladders off, we increment the amount of ladders that can be can be alive, until we max out at a cap of like six, and that's when like the end of the level really is, and so the player is this like has like ramping enemy power over time, and it's always ramping based off of how much the player is clearing then too, because clearing the ladder would clear the enemies from being able to spawn in that location. That would, you know, maybe like knock up two. So it's a little bit like a Hydra in that case, right? This was working out pretty well, uh, but the sequencing felt weird, right? Like the enemy types that we were spawning felt weird. And I think that the more time, you know, that we spent in detailing out how the ladders would come up and how many were active at any one time and what enemies would spawn when you're doing the more systematic approach, it was actually harder to tune because really what they wanted was just like, okay, there's two ladders over there, and then knock those over, then there's one ladder over here, then knock that over, then three ladders come up and one's over there and two are over here, blah blah blah. Like, and you know, and this one has, you know, that enemy type, and they wanted them, you know, they wanted that more run through thing, and you have to think then too. It's like, okay, why am I building a system for something that players are going to play once?
Yeah.
Does it matter that it's always the same pattern every single time that the player plays the level? And that was the biggest thing that I'm like, I mean, give them some variety, give them things. But if players aren't replaying levels,
Yeah.
what's the point, right? So almost like just actually doing the more speedy approach and just like get it in, get it working, and get it there helped out. Whereas I went to quality and built built a bit of a system there to say how do ladders come up. But that's just time. It's, you know, it's almost some cost fallacy then at that point. Now my idea at the time was like, hey, let's make something that then we can tune later, right? You know, like, hey, if the enemy types don't feel good, whatever, like I can just, you know, dial that up. If the ramp of there's too many enemies or too little enemies is anyway feeling, I just change a value and I can ramp that up, right? And I think that those things are still good, but could have also just injected, here's just like this little piece, you know what I mean, that goes into it. And it leads me into thinking then of where all of that data was coming from was all just in prefabs and in levels, and their entire game is just prefabs, levels, blah blah blah, right?
Right.
But the games that I'm, working on now, it's like I'm working with indie developers. That's how they think, right? Everything is just in a scriptable
Yeah.
object,
Yeah.
and I don't, what the hell is mass data importing, and what's an economy, and like the decisions that they're making are like you can do everything in the Unity editor, and like that's fine, but if I'm trying to author and change balance across 300 levels, I don't want to do that by hand. I need some better tool to be able to get that data into the game. And scriptable objects is not necessarily the best way to be doing that, because now I
Right.
have this data object that underneath the hood is a YAML file. YAML's fine. You can script into YAML okay, but you have to write something to be able to do that. Um, so we're trying to find these data importers from that'll import from CSVs or import directly from Google Sheets or something like that. So trying to make sure that your game is data driven and definable, right? So it's like, hey, like I have a character. My character is a definition. That definition is something I can call into. It holds all of the information for that thing. Um, all
There's actually a hidden downside to using Unity tools for this type of stuff as well that I think a lot of people forget is that if you use scriptable objects, or let's say on the art side you rely on their Unity animation tool.
mm,
If you have an artist or a level designer who doesn't care about anything about Unity, you're gonna have to pay for a Unity seat just to get this guy in there. It's like it's really weird. So I totally understand. You should try to use like CSVs or spreadsheets and find a way to import them and stuff like that.
yeah, like that's what I've always. That's what I want. That's what I need. I need that. If I'm gonna be doing economy curves and stuff like that, I need that. But it's funny, working with people, from this side of game development, and those needs don't seem to ring anyway true within their own minds too. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like everything that they suggest is like, do it in Unity, do it in Unity, do it in Unity. It's like, yeah, I get you, but no, like I do, like this is where game design happens, right? Is over here in this weird complex land of cells and boxes, you know what I mean? So, or is it? Or at least that's where the free to play stuff sits, you know what I mean? So, um, I would, how are you handling data right now in terms of with your game, and also like, are you bundling some of these things? Like, how are you dealing with? Are you going to deal with versioning? Do you even care about data versioning? Like if
No.
one player is on 1.6 and then you release the client version 1.7, you can't just push new data rules to the server
Mhm.
and not have versioning, because 1.6 will just break if it's if it's trying to call for something that's not there, or
Yeah.
in the same
No,
way.
that's a good question, and I'll answer it from the perspective of I'm a person who did a lot of amateur projects, and I have worked professionally. But in terms of the stuff I've done, I've never needed to do a something that a full game might want to do, which is like validating the data or in any way. So right now, especially still in the prototype phase, I haven't worried about any server stuff. So in terms of the client, though, yeah, I use scriptable objects. They're relatively easy to work with, especially when it comes to other people helping with the design. Because I think spreadsheets, mm, maybe it's because my spreadsheet foo is not very good, but I can't make a very nice one that a lot of people can tap into easily. So yeah, to answer your question, I'm doing scriptable objects, and I'm aware I need to have a better solution, but I don't know what that is right now.
Okay. What like, are all of those then you're creating at compile? Like, you already have them obviously at compile time, and then you're
Yeah,
just calling into them. Are you? Is that all resource.loads at that point, or the async loads?
yeah, yeah. It is at this point.
Okay.
Are there better options for that?
I don't know. See, these are the things. Like, there's the other side of this too. Is I think you have to do the async loads if you're pulling those things down from asset bundles. within those things.
Okay.
But again, like like that part, I'm just like dipping my feet into at this point now again. So trying to remember all of the intrinsics of exactly that. But we've talked about this before. It's like, your user state is a little different than what I would call a user state, and also it's like, because you're not really dealing with the server stuff right now. It's like, how are you going to handle all that IAP, um, stuff in the future, right? Because for us, all of our stuff sits on the server, and we have certain fields that are server authoritative, right? Hard currency, most currency values at least, but anything that's pertains to like real money dollars, right, is all hard up.
Yeah.
And then so we always check the server for those values whenever the player is doing those types of actions. Is you mean is there Unity tools that are good for these things? Like, I do need to look into this Unity economy thing, but I'm also more weary about it because anytime that you deal with a third party looking into your economy, it's like they've got a finger in your own pocket, and I don't think that that's necessarily the best thing in the world either, because like, does that block you from doing new things? Does that, are they going to be authoritative, like in the same way that you need them to be? Make sure that you're not going to lose all the money, you know what I mean? I don't know.
I do know there are Unity assets for receipt validation and those various things. So that was kind of my plan to do that. But to people that hadn't heard of the Unity economy stuff, it's they haven't really talked about it very much. They released it like 2 years ago, and at the time it was a really nice solution where it's like, hey, if you use our system, every time you spend this currency, we'll check it against the server and do all these things for you. The reason I didn't go with it was because I had already designed like my quote backend, and it would require me like just basically redoing everything to fit Unity's system. So I ended up not doing it. But from what I understand, it really does everything you would want from a simple mobile game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I should look into it more because my whole thing is just like, I don't want any. Yeah, I really don't want anybody else to like handle that. It's like, if you're gonna do it internally and make sure you handle it. But not everybody has the resources or the knowledge. Like, I definitely don't. You know what I mean? I'd have to learn
Yeah.
from complete scratch, and it's like, oh well, that thing's right there and it's off the shelf. But what other things have been off the shelf from Unity that have also, not necessarily gone the best way in the world or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But so I'm always a little bit frightened, especially when global vulnerabilities come in. Like, hey, something, there is some vulnerability in their, econ code, right? Let's just say I'm not coming out with anything, but somebody finds something. Uh, all of a sudden, every game that has that problem, now has that problem, right? It's not just like, oh, it's just your game now. It's actually like your game plus the 10,000 other games that all use this thing at the exact same time all have the same problem. So is that like mass exploitation could be brought in that way and really like take down some independent, some small studios that would otherwise like, really need that revenue, right? Like, or somebody just completely mashes your entire economy, and now all of a sudden you have to like figure out, how do you sync this stuff in, how do you do server rollbacks, how do you do server rollbacks with somebody else holding on to the strings of your economy, and like those are the things that freak me out, right? Of like,
For sure.
why just don't want to even look at it, to be perfectly honest,
Yeah. Especially if you haven't played with a lot of assets, the asset store at first is like this golden land of
It's amazing.
opportunity, but then like
I can get
once
an
you get more,
FPS. I can get
yeah,
FPS
yeah, it's
controller.
like
Oh,
yeah.
I get the
Like
corgi kit in 2 seconds, and you.
when people cite the asset store like you just did, I'm like, all right, this guy hasn't made any games yet. Because once you play with it even just a little bit, you'll be like, oh, okay, this code doesn't really work that well, or this guy's not supporting it. You run into a lot of issues. So you're right. There's a lot of reason to want to roll things on your own. You can't just be like, oh, I don't want to spend the time learning This is a bad example, but let's just say pathfinding. That's a common problem, and there are a lot of assets, and they are good for it. But
Hmm.
that's an example where, like, just maybe you should learn a little bit about it in case you need to implement it yourself.
I don't disagree with that. It is a common trope of the asset store of I download this thing, I put it in my game, I play with it, and it works well within its own context and its own demo scenes. And then you try to do anything with it, and it's like, oh, everything blows up, everything's on
Yep.
fire. I have actually no idea how all of these 10 classes even relate to each other, and I've just caused myself my own complexity. It's like,
It's like,
it's like opening the book of astrophysics and being like, well, we'll just start on page 10, I guess, and work our way back to the start of the book, and maybe then figure it out. Um, and that is an intrinsic difficulty by itself. Uh, I would also like caveat to that too is like be careful of free assets.
oh yeah,
I don't think that Unity does a whole lot of validation in terms of like what actually goes up on the store, and I've definitely heard of some sneaky bits of code getting into places that are, supposedly to report back to, like basically, hey, this asset gets embedded into your game, and if you didn't vet that code, maybe that some of that code is actually sending tidbits of information or creating a backdoor in your game, you know what I mean, for somebody else to basically exploit later on. One of those is like looking around finding some Google Sheet importers, right? Just like,
yeah,
hey, I want to import from Google Sheets. But guess what you have to do with that, right? You have to go to the Google Sheets page. You have to install a JavaScript applet into your spreadsheet, right? So that you have the macros to be able to do the export import. To do any of that stuff, then you actually have to sign in with your Google
yep,
account. It's like, okay, now they're all of a sudden requesting access to your Google account. It's like, oh, okay, you know, so, and then you look at the code, and they might just be very clearly like sending, like they might just be doing the send to the spreadsheet, but maybe it sends to the spreadsheet, but it gets sent somewhere else. Or like, who has
yep.
access to this thing? And that has freaked me out. Of like even the solutions that I've got off of the shelf and paid money for them now all of a sudden like I really don't want to sign in with my Google account
That, yep, I've
to
been there.
this, so um, I don't know what the thing is there, like, and the solution can't be roll your own, roll your own, roll your own. We don't, not everybody has time for any of this stuff. And also data validation's a pain in the ass, and this is where I say like data and code patterns really help here. Defining your data. If you have, in my case, a bubble pop game, or in other games, Swing Striker or whatever, it's like I have a character, I have an object. That object I can abstract then into all of those other objects, and I can make those scriptables off of that thing. They all hold the information for that object. But in my spreadsheet, that's all it is. It is definition ID for that thing that is completely unique, the UID, right, whatever, all of the columns of all the data that I actually need to be able to like balance or define that object itself is there in my spreadsheet. I can fill all of that in there, and then once I actually then create that stuff, or then I can hopefully do like a mass import of the CSV into the data. There's a few different sides of that though too. I've seen some implementations here that like differ. One is like a runtime environment for that, where you take in an entire database of CSVs, you take in all of that data, and at runtime you build out what you need, you hold it in memory when you need it. So it's like
Wow.
if I'm doing my character battler and I've got my deck of cards, well, you know what I mean, I've created the deck object and I know the stats of that thing because I know the character stats, and I can read that, from memory at the time. But that's only because I've like I haven't instanced all cards, but I've instanced individual cards that I know the player is going to be using in those moments, right? So yes, in that case though, you're holding a crap ton around in memory, but you have access to everything at the time. Your game is like fully data driven. You can change data on the fly and see those impacts happening in real time.
Any chance you know how performant that is on mobile when you're holding a ton of data like that?
Again, it comes down to when you're holding it and when you're not holding it. So you kind of have to be your own garbage collector, right? In that case.
Gotcha.
So, but if you're a small game, not that bad, right? And you don't have a whole lot of assets hanging around. All you really have is just your art assets, and everything is already linked. So it's just a matter of like unload, boot all those things up, put them into your thing, and just get going. Another version of that though is more of what we're doing right now, which is obviously at compile time. So make all of your scriptable assets, scriptable objects, embed the data into the scriptable objects. Then you can release, all right, hey, I have this data thing that's already sitting there, serialized or whatever, and I can just always call into that thing whenever I need it, boot that up into memory then. But I always feel that then there's some optimization between that moment of like when you are calling into those things and having to pull them out and read from that and then do it at that moment, you still have the same technical problems where like you can have slowdown, you don't have all the assets at the time.
Yeah.
Maybe you're calling for something that's actually on the server that you didn't necessarily know was even in the client, because one of the problems with scriptables is your initial bundle size needs to be under 100 meg. Now maybe this is just this is actually just a common problem, I guess, across both of the games, but I'll just keep going with it.
Yeah.
So you have to keep your bundle size underneath 100 meg. The big reason there is obviously Apple and Google have they throw up a big pop-up that says, some of them actually, I don't even know if this still happens, but um, I think it was Google, would like not allow you to download the app if the app bundle was over 100 meg and you weren't on Wi-Fi. You just couldn't even download it.
Oh.
So they would throw like an artificial limiter to your download there and make people wait. So they definitely do throw up the pop-up at least and go and say like, hey, like this thing is this size. Like, do you want to do that over LTE or whatever? And that friction is a problem. So making sure that your like core bundle app size is under that, everything else sits on the server, and then you can pull down whenever you need. Scriptables is like decent for that, for sure, right? It's a great option. But if you just have data in spreadsheets and they're all kilobits and they're not, a couple of meg an asset, those load time, or sorry, not load times, but the download times go down. The more reach that you can have, right? Like the smaller those files are that you're downloading, the cheaper it is to do that server call then as well too. It's cheaper for storage. It's cheaper for a lot of different things. So there's some interesting catch-22s or caveats between these two different models, right? And we're trying to like figure out exactly how we want to deal with it. I've also worked on a system that would build at compile time, would actually build out all of those scriptable objects on a pipeline and link all the data from the CSVs. So like every time you did the import process, it would delete every object and then rebuild the entire
Oh wow.
database. Yeah. So it would all be there, but it would always be whatever the model of the spreadsheet is. And let's just say that took a few minutes every single time. You want to make one data change, you're waiting like
Sure.
3 minutes on that loading bar every single time.
Sure, but boy, have I run into a lot of places where my two weren't synced, and like, oops, I forgot to update my scriptable object, and vice versa. I don't know which one was. I was like, shit, which one did I want to go with, and I kind of forgot. So
Absolutely. I don't know. It is funny. There's a ton of different patterns. I'd love to hear how other people are like handling data, the user state within their game, and everything like that too. But yeah, I don't know. But is there a way that you've preferred over the years? Is there just been a good way that you guys have seen it like happen or work?
yeah, actually, that was part of my question I wanted to ask is like, is everything you learn just from working at it on companies? Like, have you ever tried to look it up? Because I don't even know if it's easy to find like common structures for people to do.
No, no. So again, it's
Okay.
just I think that the tools kind of dictate what your necessity is, and then use cases then dictate like what
Yeah.
was good or what was bad, and you know, it's definitely a, you know, I mean, look, I'm a blundering idiot, and I did not do well in college and didn't pay attention all that much. So, you know, my whole thing is just like learning on the job. Like, what has
Yeah,
failed us in the past? What has worked? What has not? What have we moved away from? And you know,
yeah.
and
Uh,
yeah, go on.
I was gonna say to answer your question, yeah, because I've only made for the most part, made simple jam games. I've been able to iterate from project to project, kind of like what you said. But I just ended up with using a fairly simple, just using resource loaders and scriptable objects. So nothing terribly complex to get my data in. But I can see why you would absolutely need more sophisticated stuff later on.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I could see one of the jam games you did wasn't even so much of a jam game, but Survivor Island, the one with the roulette,
Oh yeah, yeah,
right? Or you know, things like
yep.
a lot of that, like you could data drive hardcore, right? You know, what I mean, the role itself, like
Yeah.
when things unlock, when things don't unlock, right?
That
New
was all
characters
in
popping
code.
in.
That was all in
That's
code
all
for that
code,
one.
yeah, of course,
Yep.
yeah. You know,
That is the most primitive form if we're talking about the spectrum of sophistication.
no, absolutely. So, like, when do you think that it's a good idea to go to those things and start implementing those models into your projects, right? So, like, in that case, it was like, what, you had 48 hours to make that game,
Exactly.
but that game would be great data driven, right? Like, you know, you can add a new character, it's just a new character, it's a new art assets, couple of conversations, it's skills, it's a tree, so it's like great. Maybe obviously you just do that programmatically or whatever too, but maybe you want a little bit more control, definable control over certain things that come in and come out. You know,
Absolutely.
how would you like how when would you go to that model? You know, would it be right afterwards? Is it
Yeah,
down?
I always have the same answer when it comes to scope type things. It is to understand your scope and your deadline and how much flexibility you need during that scope. Because, like you said, for a game jam, I was like, I don't have the time to build out any sort of tool, so I'm just gonna put it right in game. But if even if you have 3 years to work on a game and you seriously know, and I know that's almost impossible, but if you seriously know you're not going to need to touch something more than a couple times, then I don't see a reason why you need to build out a tool or any sort of flexibility for it. So that's an experience thing. You just have to know how projects kind of work. If your boss is wishy washy, or if your boss is like, hey, this game is going to be like this, I'm never going to change. So it all depends on those factors.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Like may I think I over index into all of this stuff, but I try to build it in from the beginning, right? Like especially when I know like this is gonna be a mobile game and we're doing this, like when we're trying to get it out, like definitely we just try to go to there. Even on the smallest scale, we're just like, no. Just like I need this. This is where it's gotta be, right? Like let's think this structure now rather than later on, right? And a lot of
Yep.
the time I'll define the system around those. These are the levers I need. This is what that object is. These are all of the columns that I would need to define that object. And I'll hand that to the engineer and be like, give me these. That's what I need. That's what that thing is. And sometimes I'll get that back and sometimes I won't. And
Yeah, I do want to amend what I said because of what you mentioned, which is that if you are working at a company and you are planning to make multiple projects, then you most likely want to put extra work into tooling so that you can carry it between projects and save time.
this is true. Yeah, absolutely. Um, oh God. Yes. One of the things that has been a big problem though, and is a difficulty when it comes to game development, I guess, and data structures is unlock conditions. When do things unlock? How do things unlock? When do they become visible to the player but still not interactable, right? That's a big case. Is like something might be visible to the player but they may need to do something else and you kind of use it as a leader to go to, you know, to go get this thing, but they didn't know about it until they completed a level, they completed a
Yeah.
zone, and now all of a sudden they can see it, but they can't interact with it until such and such a different condition. And I've seen conditional systems get crazy, right? Like where
Yes.
engineers have provided full on like I can it's this keyword and this keyword and all of those things, ands, ors, and I can make big conditional statements that are parsed and read into the game. And we spent a lot of time on those things, a lot of
It's
time
so
on them.
scary.
And I don't know, like, how do you, from a code perspective, from an engineering side, even go and say, like, I have this building, and this building is level 1, and I build it first. And by building that unlocks a different building that I can now build. Both of these buildings are upgradable, and once I get both of them to level 2, then I can move the first building to level 3. Now I can do that. And building that chain of things is like, I actually don't, I mean, I don't know what the fuck that looks like, right? Like, I could imagine it could look really hairy, but
Yeah.
what is, I mean, from your perspective, how do you even approach that problem of unlock conditions? When does this thing unlock? Like, wait
Right.
until this thing is done or the player has seen this other thing? Like,
I mean, as you described it, I'm envisioning this magical system where you're dragging and dropping nodes and trees, but I've never seen or built anything like that. But that would be very nice to have. Similar to Unity's animation system, where you're just dragging nodes and putting conditions like, hey, if this is greater than 100, then go into this animation. So that would be nice, but I haven't seen that. But one thing you mentioned, I thought about tutorials when you mentioned that, because a lot of tutorials are like, is this player on this step? And the scariest thing, especially in a game that's already live, is what if you're like, oh crap, we need to add another tutorial step in between 3 and 4. Like that is so scary. Uh, so I will say to people that need to build this, you need to consider that condition. Like, is your system going to handle that? And make sure they don't get stuck in some kind of limbo. But
no, for sure. We've done a whole lot of like conditionals for that too, where like in your data you'll have start this tutorial, and that
yeah,
tutorial is usually kind of really hardcore, really hard coded. But the biggest thing is there's always been the problem of what UI turns on and what UI turns off.
yeah,
And there was a time where I had to define everything that turns off in the scene, all of the buttons, like, hey, like all of
yep.
these buttons go to a disabled state. And I had to really politely request, I was like, can we flip this? Can I just define what I want to have on, and then you turn everything else off? Because like my lists became like every single button in the game minus this one, But then even then, you have to like have a definition for your UI key buttons, and is that then your localization key that you're using then, right? Because like in if you're going to Brazil, or any of these places, like you're gonna want to switch the language from English to Portuguese. So the best way to do that I've found is localization table, have your definition ID, your user, your unique definer for that key, and that key then points to strings for English, Portuguese, Japanese, blah blah blah, and then depending on what language the player is actually on and using, then we use whichever text, based on that column, right? But that all gets pulled in at runtime. It's not there at compile time, sitting in the scriptable, sitting on the UI layer in the on the button. There's some key that's now being used, and we have to feed that into that thing. And again, like another bloody system, right? But those, I don't know, like those things can get wicked complicated. At the same time, I mean, this is where the magic box kind of occurs, right? Like, it's great to have tutorial steps and call things out and everything like that, but how much would you pay attention to data driving a lot of that, yourself,
Right.
versus build more of a generic, I need a tutorial system, something I can key into at any time, something that can jump across features, that can deep link me to different parts of the game and stuff like that, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, like if you're making an action game, you only need a tutorial that probably happens once. But exactly like you said, if you're making any sort of or a game with meta systems, now you're gonna need a tutorial that can jump in at any time and check that they've seen it before. Um, and kind of what you said about. So I have built a tutorial system before, but this time around, I'm like, I'm just gonna download an asset. But linking it back to what we said before is like the asset is just so it covers so many cases, and you're like, I'm not exactly sure how I'm gonna use this.
Mm.
That paying for the asset was maybe not even worth it. So it just happens all the time.
Damn, yeah. They're just too generic. You almost like, I want to strip 90% of
Yeah,
this out and just be like, I don't care
yeah,
for any of this. But then
exactly.
you start pulling code out and you're like, oh, everything's breaking. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, uh, how did you go about it when you built it yourself? You know, is
Hmm.
it just a linear process? Was it like something that you could say like, this is step one, this is step two, this is everything that the player needs to do for step one? Like, how did you go and say the player has completed this step, I need to move to the next step?
Yeah, that one I tried to make generic, and I think I just saved off a boolean like flags of if they had touched areas, and if you need to spawn things. But like you said, it gets more complicated. Luckily, we only needed to spawn like one UI pop up, so I could like link that to the step. But you're right. I mean, if you need to, let's say in a typical mobile game, you're like tutorial step 3. I need you to go to the world map. I need you to click on stage 1-2 and then hit play. Is like you need it's just so much functionality that needs to be there.
Absolutely. I think like for us, we did most of our failing in Figma, and then we came out and built like a huge graph of just
Interesting.
everywhere that were every different variation of which way we want to go. We had all of the text. We have everything, and it is just very clear, like hardcore. Just do this, do that, do
A
that.
smart way to do it.
It's, I don't know because the thing is like it always partly comes down to time as well.
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, do you just get it in? Do you speed it? Do you just get it in? And that's your tutorial, and you know what your tutorial is. And if you know what it is, and you know all the steps, do you need a generic solution? But a generic solution then allows you to do more tutorials later. So like when you need to take over power of the game and inject more story into the game. Maybe you can turn that into a tutorial moment. Maybe that's now part of your conversation system, right? Like you can almost leverage that thing in a different way, and that gives you new tools to be able to polish your game up and make changes and iteration quicker. You're not always starting from nothing and then having to build it out every single time you try to do something that's
Yeah.
similar to something else that you've already done. Um, but
You
yeah,
know, to sort of start to sum this up as we wrap up, everything we're talking about, if any watchers here are wondering why a simple match 3 game end quote that should only take a few months to make takes like maybe even years, there's your answer. There's just a lot of things outside of the core gameplay. The core gameplay is probably the easiest part to make, honestly.
yeah,
I can do it in 48 hours in a jam, but there's a lot to turning a game to a real game.
yeah, dude. Absolutely. You know, what I mean, there's a lot of different directions you can go here. If other people have different ways that they've done it, please show us if they've got tools that they've used before. By all means, I think this is where the art comes in, right? It's like I'm designing, but I'm also building how I want to build as I go forward, and I'd love to hear more people's philosophy there because I agree with you, Calvin. Like, there's not much online about what does it mean to code pattern around importing
Yeah.
and exporting game data.
Or
Unless
tutorials.
or tutorials or anything like that. There's building effective systems that make sense within your timelines. You know, it's like you don't want to have to do it and then rip it out, and then all of a sudden, oh, step 2 and step 3 kind of suck, and I need to put an intermediate step, and now I have 4, 5, 6, and that just means that everything, it's all a house of cards, and it all goes away. So, I don't know. Game data is crazy, and everybody thinks about it a little bit differently. So, appreciate you riffing on me with that one. But look,
Totally.
I'm going to head out. Thank you, Calvin. Appreciate you. Have a good day, right?